Coming along and speaking. You probably know Jonathan as the Brisbane councillor for Wollongabba, and I looked up Jonathan's Wikipedia page and it said he's a supporter of public disobedience as a valid form of political action. Yeah, that's what we're about. So Jonathan's the only Green councillor on the Brisbane City Council at the moment, but the council elections are coming up, so hand it over to Jonathan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have a round of applause for the volunteers for organising tonight and bringing this all together? I'm not sure if I'm just meant to make a speech. I think that's kind of the brief. I won't start by acknowledging the rightful owners of country and paying respects to the Yagara and Turrbal peoples and acknowledging elders past and present, and recognising that the struggle for land rights and First Nations sovereignty and justice really is at the heart of what we should be advocating for as environmentalists. I feel, really moved and so enriched by having seen that movie, and really grateful to all the people who contributed to that story. I don't want to talk for too long, but there were two themes that really stuck out to me. The first was the fact that we're all just ordinary people, right? Like, I think there's sometimes this sense of, activists are some sort of special breed, or they're people over there, or it's something beyond some of us. And I thought what that movie did really well, it really came through quite strongly for me, is just that anyone can be an activist, and there are different forms of activism, and different people have different roles to play in the movement, and there's something for everyone. But just the sense of ordinary people, and I use that word ordinary with some caution, but anyone can make a difference in the world, particularly if we act collectively and we act strategically. And I think that's sort of a lesson that I tried to hold on to as much as possible, and I know a lot of people in this room are in the same mindset. But to be able to remind others of that as well is that, like, we can all be agents of positive change, and we can all be sort of actors who enact change on systems rather than being passively acted upon, if that makes sense. The other thing that sort of really struck out for me, thinking back on like what I've read about the history of the Franklin campaign, is the fact that you never quite know when the tipping points are going to happen, and you're never quite sure when that critical mass of energy will boil over and when you're going to win. And I'm struck by having recently read some of Scott Ludlam's writing, and he talks quite eloquently about those sort of cascades and those shifts where sometimes with the campaign you'll build up a lot of energy, and for whatever reason it might fizzle away, and sometimes a campaign will build up a lot of energy and you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and then suddenly you win, and it seems inevitable that you were always going to win. And I think it's really great now looking back on the Franklin campaign and to be able to say, wow, wasn't that amazing? But as comes through in the movie, at the time they didn't think they could win necessarily, and that wasn't a certainty. And these things only become sort of certainties after the fact. But I think that's really important for all of us as activists and aspiring change makers to be mindful of, is that, we sometimes get demoralised, or we sometimes feel worn down. It's important that we celebrate the wins and we tell these stories about, those moments of success, and recognise that sometimes shifts are happening even when we can't see it. And what's funny about sort of today's political landscape is that there are all these little wins happening here and there. We've suddenly seen a shift with more new coal mine projects getting rejected. We've seen like First Nations people's winning court cases where a few years ago it would seem very unlikely. So there are these, sometimes we can be part of a big shift and not even realise it's happening around us, and I certainly feel that at the moment. Like, on the one hand I feel deep grief and gloom and despair about the direction the world's heading, but then you see these glimmers of hope and you realise that actually we're living through an epoch of history that, we will look back on and be, whoa, that was a big time. But I guess the final point that came through for me, and which I think is really, really important, is the value of civil disobedience and being willing to break the law when the law is unjust and when the law is contrary to common sense and the long-term public interest and the interest of the environment as a whole. I say this as an elected representative and someone who's spent a lot of time working through the pathways and systems that they tell us we're supposed to use, and they tell you that if you want to make change you should vote for the different parties and you should run for election and all of that. And I've done all that, And I can tell you with utter confidence, having tried it, it's not enough by itself. We definitely need to be willing to engage in a wide range of strategies, employ a wide range of tactics. Sure, run for office. Like, I convinced somehow 30,000 people to elect me as their city councillor, but that's not enough by itself. We need to be willing to organise in the streets. We need to be willing to get active on the front lines. We need to be willing to get arrested and to push back on these oppressive power structures using a wide diversity of tactics. That's certainly something they did with the Franklin campaign. That's certainly something that a lot of successful campaigns around the world do. It's never just one thing. It's never just running for office, and it's never just sitting down in the middle of the street, and it's never just writing a protest song. It's all of those things put together to build a multifaceted, diverse campaign that can shift power structures. And I would suggest that in the modern day activism landscape in Australia, unfortunately, for a range of reasons, many of us have been too hesitant to engage in the most perhaps antagonistic and I would argue most effective forms of civil disobedience. We've been disciplined into thinking that it's enough to sign petitions and it's enough to write letters to MPs and it's enough just to vote Greens at election time or whatever, but it's not enough. And the system is working very effectively to channel us into the most impotent and ineffective forms of activism and to tell us that the most effective forms of activism won't work. It's a lie. They do work extremely well. But we need to recognise that process for what it is. It's a propaganda machine to tell us that we are powerless and to tell us that all we can do is sign petitions and vote at election time. So I guess the message I take away from tonight and that I hope others take away is that we can do more. We have the power to change things, but we need to be willing to think strategically and to match our tactics to the struggle and to the political moment. And I've been reading, I'll end on this note, but I've been reading a bit of Andreas Malm lately, M-A-L-M, if you want to look him up lately. He's a European climate activist, and he argues quite compellingly that there is a really big difference between, even in non-violent direct action circles, there's a big difference between not harming people, which I think is sort of a non-negotiable and very, very important. But property damage is not necessarily violence. And I think there's something to be said for that, and that's something that I encourage people to explore further and think more deeply about, that under the right circumstances and depending on the political context and depending on safety precautions, etc., we may actually have an ethical responsibility to engage in sabotage if to do so will help scare away investment in fossil fuel infrastructure projects. And that's a bold statement to be making even in environmental circles. But when we think about the long arc of human history that's yet to unfold, that there are tens of thousands of people yet to be born who, if we don't get meaningful action on climate change in the here and now, if we don't manage to turn this ship around and catalyse rapid shifts away from fossil fuel extraction and burning, tens of thousands of years of human beings to come will suffer as a result of our failure to act here and now. And in that context, it no longer for me is a question of, oh, should we engage in civil disobedience? Should we engage in sabotage? I think we actually have an ethical responsibility to push the envelope and do more than we are doing. So I offer you that provocation to think more deeply about, because there are a lot of people who for a lot of time would say, oh, we can't be too provocative because we'll put people off. But I think the lesson of successful campaigns like the Franklin Rivers campaign is that actually a little bit of friction can be a good thing. And yes, there will be some people you piss off, but if we're not pissing people off, we're probably not doing it right, I think, at the end of the day. So, like I said, a range of tactics, match the tactic to the situation, but let's not shy away from the tactics that are most effective, because people who don't want the system to change are telling us that they're not effective. So thank you all so much for coming along today. Thanks for the invitation to say a few words, and on with the struggle. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. And before our next speakers start, we're going to hand out some clipboards with the intention of inviting you to sign up to get more information about the organisations that have been involved with this screening, which is Move Beyond Coal, which is the evolution of Stop Adani. We're really targeting not just the Adani mine, but all coal and fossil fuels. the Australian Conservation Foundation, which has been a powerful lobby and activist group for decades, and also Extinction Rebellion, which is more non-violent direct action. So I'm going to pass those things around while our speakers talk. And I want to introduce Jan McNichol. Thanks so much for coming along, Jan. So Jan's going to say some words about the Move Beyond Coal campaign, which is actually just getting into gear, and there's a lot of actions that are starting in the next week that you can all be involved in. So while Jan's talking, I'll hand out those clipboards if you want to put your name, email, phone number, and which organisations you want to hear from. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. My name's Jan McNichol, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Move Beyond Coal. I just want to tell you a couple of things. First off, I'm one of Jono's constituents, and the people like me in the Gabba ward are the best. We have the Greens at state, federal, and local government level, so we are the best. Yay! I'd also like to disassociate the movement beyond coal from any suggestion of sabotage. I think it's a completely unstrategic thing to do, and I have nothing to do with it, and I want that out there up front right now. Disagree. If anybody thinks that joining Move Beyond Coal you're going to get to do any of that kind of crazy stuff, don't join us. So, this is my security blanket speech. It's too late now for that, but I'll talk about 2 points to tell you about the Move Beyond Coal. It grew out of the Stop Adani movement, as Sarah said, and it is a people-powered, as in non-violent direct action movement, and it's science-based. It has the intention of stopping the Australian coal industry by 2030, not some vague time off in the future, but by 2030, if not before, if we possibly can, because that's about all the time we have left according to the science. So that's what we're intending to do in our own little way. I just start off talking about people power. It certainly works. It's worked against coal in the past. It's kept coal in the ground at the Adani mine for 8 years. It's stopped other coal mines around the country. Various alliances of farmers, greenies, traditional owners have come together in different places and been able to put the end to coal mines. It's not over yet, but it has succeeded, and it will continue to succeed if people put themselves out there and support it in various ways, from all different ways, where you can support a social movement, whether it's being on the front lines getting arrested like we saw in that stirring movie, or whether it's giving money or doing office work or whatever else you can do. There's a huge range of needs, being an artist, a performer, whatever, we saw all that in that movie. Don't think that this is something that an individual action is going to resolve. It really does take group action. So get involved, learn how to survive in groups and be useful, and contribute your talents to stopping this business of coal mining. Just a few things about the coal industry. They're desperate for finance from banks and other financial institutions, and so our focus is on stopping the money. And that's why at the moment Move Beyond Coal is focusing on the National Australia Bank financing a particular evil coal company called Whitehaven Coal, who are intending to double their coal production, never mind anything else, and they have all this greenwash about why it's a great idea. So that's the focus of our action, and a whole lot of little groups around the country to monster individual NAB branches around the country. My particular group is the Stones Corner Mob, and we visit the National Australia Bank every Monday morning and hold banners outside and generally harass them, but we're going to take it up a notch, I think. I hope. Yep. The big banks have greenwashed their image. They have all these ways that they say they're not funding coal, but they absolutely are. They make exceptions for themselves. So we are calling them out on that and trying to stop them. As you no doubt know, that this is the environmental struggle of now, because coal is beyond bad. Everything around it is wrong. It is destroying the planet. It is not going away. So we are really going to go out there and try and stop it from continuing. Just massive amounts of money involved, and it's absolutely imperative if we want to have a survivable planet in the next 10 years that we stop the coal industry. So if you want to get involved, there are clipboards going around, and I strongly suggest that you agree to join our group and make yourself known and felt in this movement to stop coal. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan. And that's a very powerful ways to stop the money. all these industries, fossil fuel industries, are happening because they're being funded by people like the National Australia Bank, and so that's a really powerful way to act. And I want to also support Move Beyond Coal, because it's a really great collaborative movement that's based in the communities as well, so you get to know some local people, you adopt a local branch as well. It's a fantastic way of taking action using people power, and also gatherings outside banks as well. It's a lot of fun, right? Okay, I want to introduce our third speaker, David Hood. So David has done some fantastic work for the climate over decades as an engineer, on the board of the ACF, is that right? Yes, an ACF board member, and more lately as a member of Extinction Rebellion. So he's going to talk about all of the different ways that you can engage with Australian Conservation Foundation and Extinction Rebellion. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Sarah. I was really moved by that movie because I was alive and living at the time it all happened, but I was in the Royal Australian Air Force as a serving officer, and I was a little bit the other side of politics. You might understand that. I was even voting Liberal at those days. Yeah, God, the things that I did. Yeah. But interestingly, Dick Smith is a man that I got to know fairly well at the Civil Aviation Authority later on. He was chairman and I was one of his general managers, and we had some fun. But he's a closet environmentalist. I don't think he's a real one, because two little stories. When he was shutting down the Civil Aviation Authority and sacking all the engineers and technical officers, I went up to him and said, "Hey, Chairman, this is not good, because we're actually developing joint venture companies and making money for the taxpayers." And he said, "You better come up and see me, David." So I went up to Terry Hills and he showed me his helicopters and everything, walked out through his garden with kangaroos and koalas in the trees, all stuffed. And then went to his office where I did a presentation. I just casually picked up one of the koalas, and there underneath it says "Made in Korea." And I remember him with Australian Geographic. Where was Australian Geographic printed? Cheaply in Singapore, and probably not on Australian paper. The event demonstrated, this movie demonstrated two things to me. The most important is the extent to which the vested interests will go to try and stop protests. And I was witness to this at Blockade Australia down in Sydney, when the New South Wales government had passed those horrendous laws. 2 years jail and $20,000 fines for anyone who gets on the road and stops the traffic. And we saw the police actually implementing it, and in the knowledge that they knew the magistrates probably wouldn't impose fines or the jail sentences, they put bail conditions that were absolutely horrendous on the people they arrested. They were just arresting for no real reasons. That was one thing that came to me, that the vested interests will go to all powers they can. The second thing that came out of that movie was that non-violent direct action does work, and you saw it there. And we saw it happening in England. I was over there for the big XR rebellions in the end of 2019, and soon after we shut down London for 2 weeks almost, the Parliament in the UK passed a climate emergency. So it can have effect. Al Gore in 2012 actually made a public statement that civil disobedience is going to be the only way we will achieve the changes that are necessary to save the world. So get there. There's no doubt that the world is facing a climate and biodiversity emergency. It's definite. The science is absolutely clear. And if anyone wants to discuss that with me, I'm willing to spend time to convince you of the science. So we've got to get active. And it's no good thinking that I'm just one person. I can't do anything. I'm only small. It won't affect. There's 9 billion people, or 8.5 billion people on this planet. Well, if, say there's 9 billion, if 8.8 billion of them are doing nothing, but each one of that 8.8 billion decided to do something en masse, imagine the power that we could bring to bear. So you've got to do something. You've got to get active. And as Jan said, join Move Beyond Coal movements. Join the XR. Go and find your local XR group, and there are stacks of them around. Just look up the XR on the website. They're all there. And join the community groups of Australian Conservation Foundation. They are amazing. They bring people together for things like the opposition to the Toondah Harbour development, which is horrendous, happening down near Cleveland in the Moreton Bay, in the wetlands there, Ramsar wetlands. They're absolutely being destroyed by an urban development proposed by the Walker Brothers Development Corp. So get out there and get active. Out on the table outside, you'll see all the stuff for ACF that I brought along. If you want to have a talk to me afterwards about ACF, I'm happy to help you. We're not mad on getting members to join, but we have over 700,000 what we call supporters. These are people that have actually committed to do something, to join the community group or to sign a petition. So all I can say is we really have to get active now. Get out there, join, be active, demonstrate, get on the streets, block traffic, property damage. I sometimes agree with Jono. It's this nature. People are destroying nature. These developers are damaging nature. That's property. That's our property. So what's wrong with damaging a bank's window or an ATM or something? Get active, please.
There's obviously lots of organisations with lots of different philosophies, so you can decide what works for you. I want to give Jono the last talk. He's going to give us a poem to finish with. Thank you. And by the way, if you haven't signed up, just can you keep passing those sheets of paper around, and you can sign up outside as well. Thank you.
Thanks. It's been a big night, but I thought I'd end with a little piece. This is called Lifetimes From Now.
I love this one.
I'm seeking samples of the slowest tree species, whose seeds sleep dormant in the soil for decades before even sprouting. Trees that only grow a finger width each year and won't offer shade until my grandchildren's grandchildren are hunched over and withered. I'm planting these seeds everywhere. From dusty, dry highways to forgotten factory ruins as an act of utopian rebellion, because I'm audacious enough to believe that lifetimes from now, someone will still be around to enjoy them. And humanity won't have been reduced to a few self-centered scavengers with drab fashion sense and bad teeth. Because when I'm changing radio stations, flicking between news coverage of corrupt politicians and protest songs written by computer algorithms, I can hear faint frequencies of other futures. Through the static, between the official radio channels. Whispers of a world where homelessness has become a punchline, because the notion that a fellow human being would ever be left alone out in the cold is laughable and impossible to conceive. A world where veggie gardens are afforded the same care and reverence as we give to bank accounts. A world where the prisons have all been turned into art galleries and the flower meadows are reclaiming wastelands. I may not live to witness this, but at a time when single-sentence presidential tweets trigger military invasions, when politicians can't plan ahead beyond the next election and dystopianism has become cliche, thinking intergenerationally across centuries becomes the most radical form of political resistance. We smuggle hope, hidden within the linings in the backs of picture frames and in tightly sealed jars with faded labels, bequeathing them to our descendants in secret. See, I don't believe the future is dead yet. There's a lot of good books that I still haven't read yet. A lot of great songs that haven't even been played, a lot of beautiful friendships that are yet to be made, and the climate's way unbalanced, and that keeps me up at night, and the superbug reports always give me a fright. Robots to enslave us, and no one else to save us. Entire ecosystems collapsing overnight, but there are movements of resistance, hijacking the machine, turning whole cities green, polluted rivers clean, people rising up, building ladders out of prison bars, throw away the old map, clear the smog, see the stars. We are going to get through this. The sun will have to rise again eventually. So I'm writing love letters to the distant future. I'm planting these slow-growing seeds where they won't get washed away. And even though I know I won't get to see it for myself, there'll be a forest one day. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Thanks for the organisers.